Welcome to a special Once Upon a Crime Aftershow. In this episode, we'll answer some of your questions about the story of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be hanged in the United Kingdom. In our 7-part series, Hanged, Ruth Ellis and the Price of Passion, we explored Ruth's turbulent life, from her ambitions and heartbreaks to the fateful night that changed UK true crime history. But the story doesn't end there. In this aftershow, we'll be unpacking your questions and reactions, exploring the psychology behind Ruth's choices, her doomed relationship with David Blakely, and the social attitudes that shaped her fate. We'll talk about love, power, obsession, and justice, and ask, was Ruth a victim of her own passion or of a system that refused to understand her? So grab a cup of tea, or, in honor of Ruth's memory, a glass of champagne, and join Lorena and me as we reflect, analyze, and discuss Hanged, the Q&A after show. Welcome to this special wrap-up episode of Hanged, our 7-part series on the Ruth Ellis case. And if you've been following along, you know that we went through her entire story and the crime and the trial and her execution. And we also did a bonus episode, which dropped last week, which was about what happened to the people, the players in her case, which I found really interesting. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, you might want to, because there's some kind of mind-boggling things that happen to people. Like, nobody ended up well, let's put it that way.
No, devastating. I had to take a break. It was only like, a 15-minute raw audio. Lorena here, by the way. It was only a 15-minute raw audio, but it took me a while just to get through it because it was so sad. Everybody who played in Ruth Ellis's life, obviously her son had the most traumatic story, but we'll let the listeners go back and listen to it to themselves. But yeah, like Esther said, it was really hard to get through.
Yeah, it was pretty sad. But I did want to kind of wrap that up where people could know, because I usually get questions about, well, whatever happened to so and so, what happened to so and so, so, and I found that really interesting. So that was a short one for you, but this is going to be our Q&A, and we have some things we want to get through this quickly. We don't want to prolong this because we want to get to listener questions that we got. We thought we got some really good ones. But the first thing I wanted to talk about was the resources that I used. There was a couple of good ones. This case, happened in 1955 and in the UK. There's actually a lot of information about it, from court records to articles and commentary people have had over the years, but mostly in the UK. So when I was able to find, and I use newspapers.com, and they have a lot of great, from around the world, newspapers and things. And so I could find some of the things from there, which was really good. And we also found some great photographs for our YouTube videos, which was amazing because they had some really great photos. And then there was 2 books that I found that I used as resources. And surprisingly, they were not published until later on. So the second one that I'm going to talk about was actually first published in 1963, and then it was updated in 2013. But even the update, I'm going to tell you, I find problematic because...
Oh, gosh.
So anyway, the good resource that I found that I used quite a bit of information from, or at least springboard to find other things, is a book called A Fine Day for a Hanging, the Ruth Ellis Story. And that was written by a woman named Carol Ann Lee. There was actually word for word, which you can find online because, like I said, this was an older case and it was in the courts and all of that, word for word trial testimony and things like that. So you can get right from what people said in court, and also police interviews and things like that. But it was all kind of encapsulated in this book, a lot of it. So that kind of helped me out from having to keep going back and forth to resources. So that was a really good one. Very well written, very detailed. And so especially there was a lot about her son, Andre, in it, which especially later on in his life, that I found very eye-opening and just, like you said, very sad. Okay, and then there's another resource, which is the first one that I got because the A Fine Day for a Hanging, I was only able to get that on Kindle. I couldn't get only an ebook. I could not get a physical copy of it anywhere for some reason. And the other one, I was able to get a physical copy, and it was the first book I got, and I started reading it, and I actually did not finish it because
Oh, wow.
I had so many. It had great photos in it. I'll give it that, and it was pretty detailed about some things, but it was actually pretty detailed throughout. I'll say that, although it was a little bit more abbreviated than the first one. But the problem is that he put in a lot of his own opinion in parts of it, and his opinion was very problematic to me because it really felt like I'll give you some examples and you can tell me what you think it sounds
Okay.
like to you. Okay, his name is Robert Hancock. The name of the book is The Last Woman to Be Hanged, the Ruth Ellis story. And I feel like this is the one that most people know because it's been around so long. And I think there's been different editions of it and things like that. The latest edition, like I said, came out in 2022. But his depiction of Ruth and even other women is very annoying to me. And I think
Oh
really,
gosh.
really unfair and I really had a problem with it. So just here's just a couple of really quick, portions of it, things that I pulled out because I mean, it was throughout. I actually went through and as I was reading, I was like Xing out things. I'm like, oh my gosh, this should not be in here. And I've
I mean,
never
if
really
you
done
feel
that.
that way, you probably know how I feel then too, because I think we both have like very similar viewpoints when it comes to this topic, especially.
Yeah. So when he was talking about Ruth being, the nightclub hostess, and all of that, he said that she was basically was talking about her and the way that she related to her customers, which of course we're all men.
Right.
And he said this. He said Ruth's customers liked the way she spoke in quote masculine smut language. And then he talks about how she used four-letter words and she used that through, in her vocabulary all the time. And I'm like, masculine smut language. I'm like, okay. So basically, he's saying she's this like rough spoken, kind of crude, in her
Yeah.
speech kind of thing. Now, I can understand. I mean, okay, jump to modern day times. We all, will throw an F,
Yeah.
not all, a
Drop
lot
an
of us.
F-bomb. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty common now. I mean, honestly, I don't think I ever used that word until I was in my 40s. It just wasn't normal. I wouldn't say it's not normal for women. It was not normal for women in my family. But okay, let me narrow it
No,
down. There's just
same.
some things you
Yeah.
grow up with, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I just didn't. And I don't know, like as I became more of a communicator, I realized there were times that it really does drive the point home, like to throw in,
Hmm.
a word that's maybe, the F word or some other kind of word like that. And I don't know. I mean, yes, of course, she probably picked up some of the speech from all these soldiers and these men she was around, but the way that he put it, and that's mild. Okay, that's one mild example. Here's another one. This is the one where I had to like I put like exclamation, put like in the margin, like what? So he's describing Ruth in a photograph taken at the court club, and this was taken soon after she returned to work there. Remember, she was working and then she left. She married George Ellis, and then they had their little, horrible marriage. Basically went through her money, came back, and then she's like,
Hmm.
"Well, I have to get back to work." When she gets back, they had a party for her, like to welcome her back at the court club. And this is a picture taken at that party. This is the way he wrote it. He said, quote, "A photograph of the party given to celebrate her return shows the empty, lecherous faces of the regular clientele." Now, first of all, you're already like if you picture in the clientele a bunch of, like horn dogs or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, okay, whatever. Again, this is what I'm saying. It's these little opinions he throws in. I'm like, why do you have to? Like he was using descriptive language, but it was all very judgmental. Then he says this. This is the one I'm like, oh my God, what is he saying here? Like, this is crazy. He said, Ruth is wearing a faintly lesbian outfit, and he
What?
puts lesbian in capital L. What is that? Like, Ruth is wearing a faintly lesbian outfit of a severe white jacket whose neck is filled by a silk scarf knotted in that strange square fronted way, then favored by homosexuals.
Oh
What?
my
The way her
gosh.
scarf was knotted was who knows this? Who says this? I didn't find anything that said, oh, lesbians tie their scarves this way. Like, what are
Yeah,
you
that's not
talking
what I
about?
think of at all. Like when I think of a lesbian outfit, but like, what is a lesbian outfit, especially at that time?
And why is he
Is that
saying that she's acting like a lesbian when he's saying that she's over here with all these men? I don't understand what that, I don't even know where that came from.
at
I was
that
like,
point
and
he's
he
like
wasn't like,
contradicting himself? Like he's saying one thing, but then now he's like saying another thing.
yeah,
That doesn't make any
like
sense.
speaking out of both sides of your mouth. That doesn't make any sense. And either way, you're just labeling her something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that to me I didn't like. And then okay, so now he's talking about Vicky Martin, her friend. Remember Vicky, who
The one
who
that
was
passed
like
away.
and yeah, the one that was in the car accident. She died.
Mhm.
Now he's giving the bio of Vicky Martin, and he says that she had begun working various jobs at age 14, including nursing. Okay, so she was like Ruth. She, had to
A
survive.
hustler.
She was a hustler. Yes. He says, but quote, none were satisfying for an ambitious, busty girl who wanted clothes and money.
Oh my
Busty
gosh.
girl? Like, could have just said ambitious girl who
Yeah.
wanted the
You
finer
got to
things,
throw in the
wanted
busty part.
yeah, wanted more out of life or was ambitious or you know what I mean? He always has to turn it and spin it and make it a negative, and that really annoyed me. So that's why I didn't finish this book. There was one more talking about Ruth and Vicky's friendship. Now this might be, I don't know, that maybe he had a hint that there was some lesbian thing, but there was no. I mean, even if there was, who gives a shit? But it didn't
Yeah.
seem like there was any like backup for that. Like he didn't say, oh yeah, people said they were lesbian lover. No, he didn't say any of that. He just hints at things and labels things. And so about their friendship, though, he says this. He says, "quote They lent each other money and never paid it back. Why don't they just say they gave each other money? Well, they helped each other
Yeah.
out financially. They got hung over together." And then he
If
ends it
being
with,
hungover with your girlfriends is lesbian, then oh my gosh, I am gay as can be then. Because I don't even know how many times that's happened.
but then he ends it with this, and this is when I was like, that tears it. I'm done with this book. Like, they got hung over together, and then he ends it. It was a grand whoring world.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
my God. What did you just call them? Hello. Like, oh my gosh. It was just,
Wow.
I was like,
Is
dude,
he still writing? Is he still
I think
publishing
so.
books?
I think so. I don't know if there's anything
Oh
about him.
boy.
Yeah. And then it says this in the back cover. I'm like, meticulous and fair in its analysis. The last thing the yeah, that's the last thing it is. It's
Oh,
opinionated.
and that's the one
So
that was originally published
yes.
in 1963 and then okay.
Yeah, but the
Wow.
version I have was updated in 2022, and none of this stuff was edited. I mean,
Right.
so yeah, like I
You
said, there
can
was
go
some
back and
great,
like fact check some stuff.
or at least say, yeah, let's not let's get away from the victim blaming, the shaming,
Yeah.
the shaming, all those stuff, and then just put out a book like about this
Like
case.
that's actually the story of her life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, we had questions, so we're gonna go to questions, and we're gonna try to go in order. So that's kind of how the story unfolded, but we may jump around a little bit, and we're gonna try to get to as
Mhm.
many of them here. I'll let Loretta take it
Um,
away.
like you guys have noticed, with this series, we did do something different. Being a seven-part series, this is the longest series we've ever done. We've done like three-parters, which was the longest, but because the story was so long and so many details, we had to put it in with seven parts. And I didn't do any of the research for this case. So as I was audio editing, I would make like mental notes like, oh my gosh, question about this. But then throughout the series, these questions would be answered. So I kind of liked that. It was like, oh, am I gonna find this out before everyone else? Mwahaha. But we started from the beginning, and we don't always do that. Sometimes on Once Upon a Crime, like we'll start at the end, we'll start at the middle, but we started at the beginning. So from the very beginning, we learned that Ruth was born into a life of instability. So how did Ruth's early life of instability affect her?
Yeah. So if you guys remember from the first episode, we went into her background. We saw that her father was absent from the family quite a bit. He was working as a musician on a cruise ship or cruise ships, I should say. So that was the first thing. Is like her mother was her like almost like a single parent because the father was away so much, and they were apart a lot. The mother and father, of course. So their marriage was pretty different. Now, remember, the
Mm.
mother already had a child, which was a child of rape from the person, the family she worked for. The son assaulted her. She had gotten pregnant, and so when her mother met her father, she already had her son. What's his name? Julian, is that right? And so that was already different. And then her father was away. After her father lost his job with, as a musician, they moved around frequently. So that was the instability too, is that they kept moving to different towns for him to find work. And then when she was still a little girl, her mom left the family. Remember, for like six
Yes.
months,
Yeah.
she just took off, and she had just had the baby, the youngest daughter, and she basically left Muriel, the oldest, and Ruth and the little girl to kind of fend for themselves because we know dad's not stable. So that was very odd. So she had her mom out of her life for a little while too. When you have that kind of absent parenty, parenting going on, and parents in and out of your life, or even if they're there, they're not that stable, you tend to learn not to trust anybody. Like, you have to fend for yourself. You have to be a
Right.
strong person, fend for yourself, do for yourself. You don't rely on people. um, you just, there's a trust issue there, because if
Mm.
I trust that they're going to be there one day and they're gone the next day, it's too much of an upheaval emotionally, so I have to take care of myself. This unconventional family life that they had, I think it kind of led her to be an unconventional kind of girl during that time. I really
Yeah.
do. Because it
Mm.
wasn't like you would normally have, like, oh, stay home, and mom's there monitoring you, and dad's like the protective figure, and at least for girls at that time was really important, and she didn't have that. It makes sense. People later on like, oh, she was kind of an outlier. She wasn't like a normal, what you were expecting from a woman at that time. Well, she didn't grow up in that kind of life. There was a couple of other things that I thought about too. Is the war. The war was really important because, I mean, think about it. They were under bombing nightly, and
Right.
they lived right outside of London, and there was a lot of bombing, there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of danger. She may have normalized that level of, like, that stress level, that chaos, that almost danger
Yeah.
becomes normalized. You have to learn. And the one thing they said about Ruth is she was always very even tempered, even keel. Nothing seemed to really rattle her. Even remember when they got bombed when she was with her dad, and
Right.
she's the one that saved her dad, pulled him out of the thing, and she didn't lose her head. She didn't, scream. She just did what she had to do to save her father. And I feel like that again came out of her, traumatic and stressful childhood, was to learn to, hey, you just roll with the punches. There's another thing though, and this is something that I, in the first episode, I believe it was, or maybe the second, when I'm talking about the soldiers coming back from war, how they were expected to go back to this normal family life and work a 9 to 5 job and provide for the family. And this is where the nightclubs and prohibited places and all this kind of stuff became a draw, became a big business, because they were seeking still that thrill, that
Yeah.
adrenaline rush they got during war. Wondering whether this wasn't just the men, but some of the women, like Ruth.
Yeah.
Because
Makes
one
sense.
of the comments she made when they asked her, because she would go out, it was like they had the blackout periods where you had to keep all the lights off and stuff because of the bombers and all this kind of stuff. But she would sneak out to go find a dance, like there'd be a dance at a basement, or a little underground club or something, and they would say, "Aren't you afraid, like, of doing that?" And she said, they said, how can you go out dancing during this time? It's so dangerous. And she said, why not? A short life and a gay one. She's like, I'm just going to have fun. It's going to be short life anyway. That was
Right.
her mentality. So maybe she was kind of set for needing more adventure, more even drama, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Chaos. I feel like we all have a person in our life that has that, somebody who always is just like, oh my gosh, I gotta tell you this. It may not be as chaotic as Ruth's life, but someone who always just has like that chaos in their life, chaotic energy. And yeah, maybe Ruth was just an extreme version of that.
It's possible. But as we know, this whole her being so calm and even keel and unemotional, although it helped her survive during wartime and all this kind of stuff, and all the just the lifestyle she was living, we will see that, of course, later on it worked against her with the judge and the jury. You know,
Right.
that whole
So, along with all the instability that she had as she was growing up, we know that Ruth's parents struggled financially, which sometimes made it difficult for them to even provide for their children. In episode one, we hear that, they all wore like hand-me-down clothing. Kids would like cross the street so they didn't have to like walk by the Nielsen children. What was Ruth's response to all of these hardships as a child? Because she even dropped out of school at a really young age to even help the family, right?
right. Yeah, she started working really young. And one of the things too is that mom said that Ruth was her favorite child. Now you're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, definitely not.
But I think it might have been because she was so resilient and she was so positive. You know, like you said, living in this poverty. And one of the things her mother remembered her saying as a little girl is that, Mom, I'm going to make something of myself. This was, what she aspired to. She wasn't great in school. She had terrible eyesight. She wasn't a good student. And she was also very shy when she was young. She
Mhm.
wasn't, like outgoing or anything like that. She just was very confident for some reason in
Mhm.
herself, maybe because of everything that she went through. But of course, this became more of a challenge for her to make something of herself when she had her son Andre. She was only 17. So usually at that time, that would seal your fate. Now you just got to find a husband and you're going to be there taking care of this kid, probably on a very meager salary or income or whatever, just like her mom did, just like her dad did. And she wasn't having it. She was like,
Mhm.
nope. So she started looking for first of all, she started working whatever job she could, waitressing, working in factories, whatever to provide for her son, but not just to provide for her son. She wanted enough to be able to have nice clothes. She wanted to look good. She liked nice clothes. She liked makeup. She liked getting her hair done. She liked looking like
Mhm.
an attractive girl because she learned when she started, hitting puberty that boys thought she was pretty. And
Mhm.
that was the first time she got that kind of attention because she wasn't a cute little girl. She was, wearing these big glasses and she, she was kind of mousy and all of that. And that really gave her another boost of her confidence. So now she was like, oh, I want, and then she was also very enamored of everything Hollywood. Wartime was the age of the bombshell, like
Yes.
where the blonde bombshells and and all of that, the Marilyn Monroe's and the Diana Dores and all of that stuff. All the girls were like, wow, just they get all the attention. They walk in the room and all the guys are at their feet. She loved that. So there was other things she wanted. She wanted to go dancing. She wanted to have fun. She loved the social opportunities that were in the city in London. Now they were living outside the city most of the
Mhm.
time, which this is the thing that kind of blew my. I read this a few times to kind of understand it. That we know her father was abusive, and we'll talk about that. And she did everything to stay away from him. But then when he moved to London for work, she moved with him, not because she wanted to be with her father, but because she wanted to be in London because that
Yeah.
was the place, right? But I mean, that was a sacrifice to have to be around her father for that. But even before that time, but even that kind of makes me think that she knew how to use men when she needed them to get what she needed.
If it's going to benefit her, then yeah, why not? But unfortunately, Ruth did suffer a lot of sexual abuse through the hands of her own father. We find out that her oldest sister, Muriel, actually got pregnant with the father's child. And, the family had to hide that because they wanted to avoid scandal and everything. Because of that, how do you think Ruth viewed men and how did she navigate relationships? And do you feel like that had a factor in it?
I think she was a survivor. And so she did what she had to survive and not just a meager existence, but to have what she would call a good life. And for her, that included making money. And so so she took the opportunities that other young girls might not, like the nude modeling. When she started doing the nude modeling, even working in nightclubs was of course looked upon like you're a certain kind of girl who works in a nightclub, even if you were just a waitress or whatever or something like that. Because what we know, especially when she met Morris Conley, he was kind of like the vice boss of the area in London. That was they knew that how to make more money was to do sex work. You basically
Mhm.
trade your body for money, and she was able to do this for a couple of reasons we'll talk about later on. But as far as men in general, if we go back and we look at it, she didn't have any good experiences with men. you know um her father was sexually abusive or tried to be. She would say that she didn't let him, but of course we don't know. Like, and that she would always fight him and things like that. And she told her sister Muriel, "I'm not going to let happen to me what happened to you." And but we also know that her father was neglectful and he was absent from her life. So she had this inconsistent, male presence in her life. And then when he was around later on, he became abusive. Her Muriel would say that they were frightened of their father by his temper, and that he also made them feel insignificant. So he put them down, all of that. So all of these things are already now. This is what a male person is in Ruth's life. Somebody who's abusive, who's neglectful, who's belittling. Who does that sound like? Later on,
Yeah,
right?
we'll find out. Yeah, we'll meet him later on in the
Yeah.
series.
Yes. And but as a woman at the time, she was expected to marry. That was the respectable thing to do. You find and here's post the World War I, and so lots of men there to choose from. Just get married, you marry soldier, you go off to the suburbs or whatever, and you raise kids, and you're safe, kind of thing. She did try this a couple of times. Well, she had two significant relationships before David Blakely. One was with the Canadian soldier Claire McCallum. That's Andre's
Yes.
father, right? And that was the one I would say that, well, as a young girl, it's hard to know as a young girl because you fall in love easily, right? She fell in love with him. She was in love with him, and she ended up getting pregnant, having his child, and then discovering, I don't know exactly when she discovered that he was married. I have no
Wow.
idea. We know the mom found out when Ruth was pregnant and had been sent away to this hospital to have the baby or whatever. So she contacted his commanding officer and said, "Hey, he's got a kid coming." And they said, "Oh, well, he's married and he's got kids and he's, whatever, in Canada." So I don't know when she found out, but in either case, that had to be a huge blow to her that he was not going to be. But she immediately shut him out. So
Yeah.
she found out, or as soon as he wasn't around or whatever, because he tried to, woo her again, sending her
Uh-huh.
flowers and see her, and the mother had sent him away, but she also sent him away. She was like, "I'm done." And after that time, she said, "I no longer felt any emotion about men." Now, this is when it makes it easy for her, just like men used her as a commodity, for her to use men as a commodity.
Yeah.
What can you do for me?
Yeah. It was a business transaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which made her perfect for that kind of work. For like,
Right.
because you don't have any emotion. You're not in love with these guys. You're not, it's just, hey, they like me. They buy me champagne. They give me money. I'm a young woman, like having fun and
Yeah.
making money. And I use it to provide for now, my child as well. So there
Yeah.
was that.
And to
Yeah.
create a better life than I had growing up and to be able to give my child a better life than I ever had growing up.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
there was
because
something,
her whole thing was to become respectable
yeah,
in some way.
yeah,
She went
in
about
some
it
way.
in a way that most people would say, "How are you going to make that work?" But she thought
Yeah.
she could.
If she wanted to come off respectable, how do you think she felt about becoming a sex worker?
I think she didn't have any problem with it at all. I think that she didn't feel ashamed about it. She didn't feel like it was wrong. It was what, she was working in an establishment. That's what the women did.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she was doing well at it. And she, like I said, didn't have the emotional ties. And again, I almost feel like she didn't have, almost like, you know, all of us have this other, side that's the self-conscious side or whatever, like, oh God, now I feel bad about myself, whatever. I don't think she did.
Yeah.
I don't think she did. I think what they call, your shadow side, the side that you could do things where maybe wouldn't be seen as respectable or maybe frowned upon or maybe might be more risque or whatever. I think her shadow side was really prominent.
Yeah. No, I
And
agree. I feel like she was probably like, look at all of the things that I'm able to buy and accomplish and travel and see by doing this. There's no shame in it. There's one quote I actually recently read, and it was like, the worst thing a woman can be is simply pretty and not do anything with it. And it's true. Like Ruth was gorgeous. She was so pretty. And yeah, she fell into this line of sex work, but at least she was like capitalizing on it. She was making money on it. She was smart enough to create a business by her looks. And if she was able to emotionally shut it out too, good for her. That takes a lot of, fortunately, trauma, but also strength to be able to do it. And, she worked with what she had, and good for her.
Yeah, and that's the thing you have to think about at that time. There wasn't a lot of options for women. You weren't
Right.
going to go out and start another kind of career, be a lawyer. You weren't going to be a doctor. You weren't going to, it just, especially not from where she came from with the, poverty and all of that. So this was the best she could do. And she took it and ran with it. She's like, yeah, she got to travel. She got to experience things that I'm sure other girls she grew up with never would even imagine. It was really a fluke that she ended up married to George Ellis, which was the
Mhm.
second significant man in her life, because she didn't like George Ellis. He was
Yeah.
just a guy who, he's kind of a sad sack. He was the guy who was the dentist whose wife had left him because of his heavy drinking. He wanted more than anything to get his wife back. That wasn't going to happen. He had two sons. So he started drinking in the clubs. Of course, was attracted to Ruth because she was the most popular one in the club, buying her drinks and then wanted to take her out. And she didn't want to go. I mean, there's a lot of guys she would go out with afterwards, go to dinner and this and that. And she just wasn't interested in him that way. And that's when, one day he said, oh, I'm going to go over to this club after. You're going to come meet me. And she goes, oh, yeah, sure, I'll be there. And she wasn't going to go. And then she finds out when he's there that he ends up getting assaulted because he's
Yeah.
schmoozing it up with a woman who's like a girlfriend of a gangster or something. So then the next day she hears about this and she feels terrible. So we also see that Ruth has a warm heart. She is compassionate. She is
Yeah.
caring. She's not a cold-blooded, bitch kind of woman at all. She does have a softer side. And she felt really bad about it. So she goes to visit him, and that's when he talks her into, okay, you have to go out with me
Oh,
now. And
right
then he ends
now.
up taking her away. But their whole relationship, it was a true shit show relationship from day one, you know.
Not only, the trips and, he was a successful dentist, a lot of love bombing. I don't think that was a term back in this
Mm-hmm.
was 1947 at this point. It was before. So yeah, like lots of love bombing, lots of yeah, just alcohol. She wasn't in the right state of mind. So she was like, this is fun. Like if I can live like this could be easy. I don't need to like the guy.
Yeah, exactly. And and even their marriage came about in a weird way too. It was like they were, going all over the place. They were having these fights too, but then they would get drunk again and then they just keep partying and whatever. And then they ended up at his house. He took her back to his house and his mother answered the door. So to save face, he said, "This is my wife." He couldn't like, tell his mom, "Oh, here's,
This
this random
woman.
woman I've been, whatever."
Yeah.
He was had been a dentist. He had been a respectable family man and all that, and kind of like I don't know, a fall from society for him or something.
Mhm.
But as soon as they got married, she became, and this is one of the things Hancock kind of does this a very heavy hand in his book. But there is some of this you see, but I think it also had to do with the fact that she was drinking very heavily, and I believe she was also taking some kind of drug as well. Remember, we saw that later on that there was some drugs they were doing. I don't know exactly what it was at the time, but she started becoming very paranoid that he was, seeing other
Cheating.
people. And I don't know, maybe it's just that idea that you're my husband now, and if you're cheating on me, like I can't have that,
Right.
you know.
Well, and at that point, she wasn't working anymore because he didn't want her working. So she was like, I'm not doing anything. And yet here I am not making any money either. And yet, she has all this paranoia going on.
So the
And who,
stability she had created for herself was kind of out the window.
right,
Now
right,
she
right,
had,
right.
her wagon to his star, I guess.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
down.
But yeah, we learned that, like you said earlier, Ruth started working at the nightclub. And then once she married George Ellis, she stopped working. And then she went back to work once she pretty much burned through all her money. What made her such a successful nightclub hostess? Because she was working under Morris Conley, who was like the nightclub guy around that time. And like he was also obsessed with her. Like he was kind of possessive. Like, that's my main girl. Didn't he only like want like top clients like hooking up with her because he was also hooking up with her?
Yeah, he didn't mind because this was her job. He didn't mind
Right.
her working and, of course with the better paying clients and stuff because he gets a cut and
Yeah.
all of that. He didn't want her spending time with one guy because she was his girl.
Right.
So
Right.
you can split around butterfly to all these guys and make money and have a nice time and all this stuff, but know that you don't belong to anybody but me kind of thing. Right.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, that's a typical kind of possessive, controlling male kind of,
Yeah.
personality. Not saying that all male, I'm saying that type of
No.
man is like, right. So there's a couple of things. One is well, she was a very attractive woman, but also the fact that there are just some people, even though, I mean, you've probably seen this, there are some women and even men who may not be the best looking, but they just have this confidence about themselves and they just have something that
Like the
draws people to them.
charisma, the
Yes.
swag.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something if you could bottle it would, you could be a
Right.
bazillionaire, right?
Yeah.
But you can't. Like I say, you either have it or you don't, that kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. And she definitely had it. Everybody was drawn to her. And plus the fact that she could detach herself from this. Like I always thought about this. Like, if you were like this high class call girl, like, how do you act like you really like these men and you're really into them? Because that's what they want, right?
Yeah.
That, oh, I can't resist you kind of, thing or whatever. But how do you do that? Because you know that 99% of these you could totally resist.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not your type. They're not suave. They're not, whatever. And so, but she could do that. She could make every guy feel like the most desirable, wonderful person in the room. She did become I mean, to the fact where he gives her her own club.
Yeah. And flat right above, like that is goals. Flat right in a main strip in London, nice neighborhood.
And a good salary and and she was able to design the club the way she wanted. She brought in French chefs to provide the food. She had the best champagne, she had the decor so it looked high class. I mean, she knew what she
Mm.
was doing,
Oh yeah. So
and it
yeah,
was very
she
popular even because before, like, some of these guys, like especially in these neighborhoods, well, we'll see what David Blakely, but it's like, oh, we wouldn't be caught dead in those clubs. Those are for low lives. But her club was, ritzy. And even those guys would go in there and spend money.
yeah,
So
yeah. So yeah, Ruth had made a successful career and she was the youngest manager of a nightclub. And when she became managing the little club, she was making her own money. She, like we talked about, she was invited to travel and attend lavish parties. She was given that flat. Um, why? Why? And I know we've talked about this a couple times, but why did she risk it all, everything that she's achieved after entering with this relationship with David Blakely? And what was it about David Blakely that was she was just like so attached? Like, why?
here's the thing. There's something that we learn psychologically about trauma, about early trauma in your life, that sometimes what happens is that people who experience this trauma recreate it in order to solve it because they weren't able to solve it back then. So it's almost like, so let's say, for example, you grew up with a father, or that was, let's say if you're a woman and you grew up with a father who was an alcoholic, you may end up being with men who drink too much because you think, I can change him, I can save him, I can fix this. You couldn't fix the early trauma. And it's a way to almost process that and heal it, although it's like the most toxic way you can do it because
Right.
that's not what you want. What you do instead is you seek out healthy partners and have a different experience, but if they haven't processed that trauma and understand it, they may naturally drift into something that looks the same and feels similar because as bad as it is, it feels familiar, it feels comfortable.
Right.
I know this, it's like the devil that right. But we could also say that David Blakely may have been, it seems like, because of other stories we get from people that are around him, that he also had that charisma. He also had that charisma. People were drawn to him. he was a lot of smoke and mirrors. He wasn't as rich as he pretended to be. He wasn't as worldly as he pretended to be. He wasn't as, suave and debonair as he pretended to be, but he was good at pretending,
Mhm.
and people were drawn to him. And I also think that he was the one, if you remember the first scene when she met him, she thought he was an ass because he's
Yeah.
like, oh, you're one of those club girls kind of thing, right? He was
Hmm.
the one that immediately wasn't immediately drawn to her. She had to win him. And that can
Right.
be a real strong aphrodisiac for people. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
the one that's hard to get and playing hard to get kind of thing.
Yes.
And so they did that dance. Like he was hard to get, and then she got him, and then she was hard to get, and then he wooed her back, and then it kept going back and forth, and that can be very intoxicating. And it could be
Mhm.
like it's almost like they say gambling, and psychologically gambling. When you're gambling, say you're playing the slots, you don't want to never hit because you'll stop, or you don't want to hit all the
Right.
time because it's boring. It's like you don't know when it's going to hit. That's what keeps you
Right.
stuck there, till the wee hours of the morning playing the nickel slots or whatever. That's
Yeah.
about my speed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, ooh, nickels, like you you got it big. I'm like on the
They sound
penny slots.
when they drop, they make a sound, even though now it's all digital. I don't care. They make
Yeah,
a sound.
exactly. Not as satisfying.
So she never knew when she would have his attention, and him the same. That was, I think, part of it. As far as his character, I would say that he was definitely a narcissist. He was very self-centered. He was um, he was a snob. He was a snob in love with, because I do believe he was in love with her. He was a snob in love with the club girl, and he was constantly pulled back to his respectable friend social set and Ruth, and he never let her be part of that world, really. I mean, there was like a couple of races that she went to that she felt, okay, now we're a couple, but then he'd
Mm,
yank that back. Why? Because he was getting looks from other people of his station, and he never let her meet
yeah.
his mom.
Yeah, he was
So
such a mama's boy. He never let Ruth meet his mom. And yeah, he was very he just cared too much about like what his outside circle thought of him, you know.
yeah,
But what's also crazy though is Ruth did know some of his friends. You know, we find out that she actually went to the Finletters a couple times for help. She opened up to Carol Finletter about some of the problems that, they were having. Was that the smartest idea? No, because we find out that the Finletters were Team David the entire time. So it's not that he completely had like a whole separate life with just Ruth. Like people knew about her, but it was just like his mom and that side? Like, was he ever going to actually ever commit to her?
I guess if he didn't feel he'd be judged by his family and his respectable friends, he would want her around, but he felt like he was being judged, and because he had that, he has to have this image, that he wouldn't do it, so he
And
was back and forth. He was just kind of pulled back and forth.
yeah, and little do they know is this not respectable woman is paying his bar tabs, buying his cigarettes. She was probably buying whatever drugs they were doing at the time too. She
Yep.
was letting him pretty much live. Yeah,
Mhm.
and yet she's the unrespectable one.
I know, and that's what she even said. I paid for everything, and you just come and go as you please, and whatever. That's why she should have cut his ass off. But
Yeah,
again, there was
shoulda,
that
coulda,
toxic.
woulda. Those were just like questions that we had while the research came up. These are some listener questions, and you guys had some good ones. I know we kind of touched a little bit on the choosing chaos over stability, but one question, it seemed like Ruth and David were drawn to each other's chaos. Why do you think some people, like Ruth, keep choosing toxic love when they've had stability and care with someone like Desmond? What was David's hold over Ruth?
I think, like what I said before, David's attention felt more familiar to her than Desmond's, because even though Desmond could give her, like, it's almost like, if you I mean, of course I don't know this, I wasn't in her head, but just if I was in her head, I would look at it this way. Like, David is somebody who's like the men that I knew growing up. They're unpredictable, they're abusive, um but when they give me attention, it feels like everything, you know, um, because that's all I've ever wanted was, maybe my dad's attention or something like that. And so when he gave her, so it was very hard won. Desmond was just handing it to her. That felt unfamiliar. That
Right.
felt like her, I think, was like just a customer. You're infatuated with me, you're giving to me, it's easy. I hate to say this, but it's almost boring to her. We
Yeah.
know the people that get sucked into drama. I remember this very well when I was counseling, people when I'd have women who were very drawn to the chaos. And then you find out that they came from pretty chaotic, backgrounds. And that's familiar. It's a real shame because you really have to work hard. Some people who that trauma runs really deep and they're not aware of what they're doing at first, but even when they're aware of it, they have to work really hard to reject that kind of relationship and go for one
Right.
that's more stable, more loving, more nurturing, more caring, because it just doesn't feel normal.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. Like even you just saying like it's familiar and it is a shame and it is so heartbreaking and it's toxic. You know, these not only women but also men who seek toxic women because it's like some of the women in their lives as young boys growing up, oh, who knows how David's parents were? Did we learn anything about that?
Yeah. Well, we know that, his dad had an affair with the girl who got pregnant, and then
Oh, that's right. Yes.
so then the wife, left him. And then she did find a good marriage though with her second husband who was good to him. He was the guy that was
Mm.
helping him fight his race car and stuff at first and all that. And then he finally cut him off because he's just a taker. The mom either was like one of these society women that was going to look down her nose at Ruth, or he just thought she was. I don't know because we didn't really get to hear her side of it. It's just the way he was hiding Ruth from his mom, but we don't know. She might have been okay, cool with it. She probably, she might have some questions. No, we just know from David's actions that it seemed like, oh, your mom's not. And she would say that. Ruth would ask him like, oh, it's because your mom won't accept me or something like that. And that could have just been her perception. We have no idea, you know.
That could have been David just saying that to her. His mom might have been like ecstatic to meet her.
Yeah.
Like,
I
you're
mean,
the one taking my son and putting the bill. I don't have to anymore. Thank you. Like, let me meet the woman who's like keeping him busy. Yeah, I mean, this toxic love triangle was absolutely insane. I've never heard anything like it as far as just like, going back and forth and back and forth. Desmond seemed to have like a good head on his shoulders. He was successful and steady, but yet he stayed with Ruth. I mean, we're over here talking about Ruth staying with David, David staying with Ruth. Desmond stayed with Ruth this entire time, even though she lied to him. She loved David, another man. Why do you think he couldn't walk away? And why do you think he was just so loyal to her?
I think that on the one hand, of course, she's the prize, right? She's this beautiful woman. She's very
Right,
popular. He was kind of just, Mr. Average Joe. I mean, he had money and stuff like that, but he wasn't exciting. He wasn't a race car driver. He wasn't any of that stuff. He had a nice car and he, had money and all of that. But I kind of wondered about one thing, and this may be part of it. Of course, he said he was in love with her, and we got to think, okay, what was he in love with? Remember that he spent a lot of time with her and Andre. Like Andre and they lived with him, and she'd still run back and forth with David, but Andre was living there. He was kind of like the father figure to Andre. They would do family things together, like go to the beach and go on drives, and he taught Andre this and that and whatever. I think he saw another side of Ruth that nobody else saw. I think he
right,
saw the softer side, the maternal side, the loving, nurturing side, because she would, still be like, she'd be at home. She would, there was this whole thing about how it was one of David's races, but this was something that was kind of typical of her that she would make this really nice picnic with like, she would make all these little things and make sure she had the best. So I can see her being in some ways very domestic and very nurturing, but that's the side she's not going to show at her professional side. That's the
yeah,
side she's going to show at home. Well, who was at her with her at home, who was living a normal life with her child, not out drinking and doing all this stuff? It was Desmond. I think he was the only one who really saw that side. And he probably thought, if I could just get her away from David, if she would just let that go, he's a horrible person, he's horrible to her, then she would know what it's like to be really loved. And, that side would come out of her and we'd have this happy life and all of this. So I kind of wonder about that because I thought about that a lot. They did spend a lot of time together, just, you
Well,
know,
well, we do know that, for example, earlier, how did her and George Ellis even end up together? Because she felt bad about him being slashed. She went and visited him. Like you said earlier, she wasn't like some cold-hearted bitch. And so,
right.
she did have, I would like to assume as well, she did have that soft side. We hear later on in the wrap-up episode that we did last week, her daughter Georgina, she was like, I don't really remember her, but I remember her always just being so kind and so giving, So we know she was kind and loving towards her children. Like you said, Desmond was around her when she was around Andre, and he was able to see that side of her. I guess we can call it playing house. She had that life with Desmond. But yet, yeah, we know that David was super physically abusive, and yet she stayed with him. And her younger son, Andre, did see that. Why do you think she kept him in her life despite all of the harm it caused? And do you think, even though she ever thought about it, like how would that affect her child?
I mean, that's one of the things we can say, especially, if you have, children in your life, whether you're a mother or an auntie or whatever, and grandmother, whatever, like that, oh, I never put my kid through that. But you got to remember what she came from too. So again, it's even though she was, loving and to her son, it was almost like this is the way life is. There's abusive men, and maybe she didn't shield him enough because she didn't pathologize it enough. She made it in her mind, it was kind of normal, like, and also I think she was so wrapped up in David, she wasn't really thinking a whole lot about anything else when they were in that drama. The adrenaline's rushing, you're not thinking about that, whatever. It's problematic. It definitely is, because we don't want to think that Audrey went through that, and he did, because we see it later in his life. He had a lot of trauma. He had a lot of issues. And so, yeah, I think that was something that we can definitely say that was as a really bad thing she did as a mother. Again, I think there's that thought where it was a secondary thought. It wasn't at the top of her mind because, like I said, this was normalized in her house. Like, you didn't talk about it. Abuse was just, you
Yeah,
keep it inside the family, and you don't talk about it. You just deal with it, or not, whatever.
or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another listener question. Back in the 1950s, it was rare for women to be independent. Do you think David tried to break Ruth down because he felt threatened by her strength? And why do you think he refused to introduce her to his family? Was it embarrassment, resentment, or something deeper? What do you think David's true feelings were towards Ruth? Did he love her, or was he just obsessed with her?
That's a really good question, and I think that, like you said, Ruth was the one who was, she was a successful one. He was, he had a lot of failures early on. He had failures in school, which he just kind of blew it off, because David seemed to me the type of person who didn't want to work too hard at anything. The only thing he ever put time into was the car and the racing thing. He didn't win right away, and he wasn't like some superstar. He had some good races towards the end, but he had problems with the car. He didn't have the money. So yeah, I would say that as time went on and she was becoming a success and he was not, that he was belittling to her. He was trying to make her feel less than, because the only way he could feel like he was better than her, or he was above her in some way.
Right.
And so, and of course, again, think about this. Here's this woman from the wrong side of the tracks, I guess, or whatever you want to say. And she's living in this nice flat in a nice part of town. And he's, sleeping on his, he's having to go home and then sleep on his friends' couches and stuff like that, because he's not doing well. And I'm sure that had to really stick in his craw that, oh, who does she think she is, or whatever, which is crazy, because, if you love somebody, you should be happy for their successes and you should celebrate that with them. But I don't know that honestly, I don't know that he had the capacity to for deep love, because I do believe he was a narcissist,
Right.
in one of the worst, kind of ways. And I do think he was obsessed with her, like she was the prize or whatever. I mean, he totally tore her down. She ended up losing everything because of him. And because of her past life that she tried so hard to get out of, that was a trigger for her. And then
Yeah.
she did feel less than, and then she did, start to slide downhill because now she's, and it's kind of bringing up old things for her, old wounds. So it's like he knew how to play just the right set of really bad things to keep her down and to, to be super toxic to her, or them to
Yeah.
each other, actually.
I just want to like point out real quick, and I needed to just go back and fact check it before I said this, uh, how young they were. Like
Mm-hmm.
David Blakely was 25 years old when and how many years were they
27.
in?
She was 27. I think she's 2 years older than him, 2 or
Yeah,
3.
they were so young. Like,
I know.
isn't it like the male frontal lobe isn't even fully developed until like
Yeah, until
27
like
or
30.
something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he had no idea. He was still a fetus. Like
Yeah.
when all of this
In
was
relationship
going.
terms, yes, yes.
Yeah, seriously. And yeah, she was still so young too. Yes, she had a ton of life experience and everything, but yeah, these were children. They were
Yes.
so young.
Right.
Could you imagine like your 25-year-old son in like this toxic of a relationship
Yeah.
and also add in all the alcohol and drugs that they were doing? That is not good for your brain development too. And
Right.
how many years of this? So I'm not saying it's right for him to treat her the way he did. Absolutely not. But my God, like add in all these factors adds
Exactly.
into exactly
That's
what
that's a good
happened.
that's a good point for sure. Because yeah,
God,
they
they
were
were
very young.
I don't know. I don't even think he knew what love was, honestly. Even say that he was like in love with her.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think he was mature enough for that, for really
Right.
deep committed love. I don't think so.
Exactly. All right. A couple more questions from listeners. Considering the abuse Ruth went through, do you think her defense could have argued that she was driven to the edge by what David put her through? Or was that kind of plea claiming abuse or emotional insanity just not something courts recognized back then?
Definitely would have been a different outcome, even just a few years later in the UK. And this was actually one good part from Hancock's book. He wrote that Ruth Ellis's sentence was a powerful level in establishing the law of diminished responsibility incorporated into the Homicide Act, it's in the UK, of 1957. So it was just two
Oh,
years
wow.
later. They
Yeah.
put that in there. And her case was one of the reasons, one of the big reasons why. And then he says, it's today a woman who has been subjected to the same emotional pummeling that Ruth endured in the months before she murdered David Blakely would probably succeed with this plea. So yeah, for sure. I think, and then there's a lot of other opinions that say the same thing. This is why the fact that that everything happened so quickly it's so heartbreaking that happened that way. And I want to just really quickly do the timing of the case to remind people the time between her crime and her conviction was 2 months. So she murdered David Blakely on April 10th, and she was convicted on June 20th. And during that time, it was mostly like pretrial stuff. She was being interviewed by psychiatrists and detectives, and her attorney and defense attorneys and all. I mean, and prosecutors and all of that. And then the time between her conviction and her hanging was just 3 weeks. So she was convicted on June 20th and she was hanged on July 13th, which is crazy. I went back to and I looked, the time between meeting David Blakely and her hanging was only 19 months.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that eye opening? It's like she met him in August 1953 and she was hanged in 1955. So she didn't even know him for 2 years.
Wow.
But this is the other thing that if you got, and I almost kind of glossed over this, I think, in the episode, but the length of her trial was one day. One
Oh
day.
my
And
gosh.
I looked
Wow.
at it, I said, no, that can't be right. Because I went back and I'm like, wait a minute, June 20th, but I put down her trial started on June 20th. That can't be right. But I went and I looked and I even had to look at other sources just to make sure. Yes, it was one day her trial. That
Wow.
includes her being on the stand, everybody being on the stand, all the things, whatever. And then The jury convicted her the same day in less
Oh,
than 20 minutes
wow.
to find her guilty of willful murder. So they didn't even deliberate, like, oh, second degree or mass, or whatever other things they might have been able to. They just said, okay, yep, because, she said, when they asked her, he said, well, yeah, I intended to kill him. When they asked, she was like, well, duh, like, what else could I say?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so 1 day trial for a
Wow.
hanging. And the thing is, you got to remember is that if you were found guilty of willful murder, then you were hung. That's it. There was no there was no other sentence that you could get. You were going to die.
I don't know if you have this on hand, but do we know what the jury, like, was it like mainly men, women?
10 men and 2 women. Yep. What they said too, they found her guilty of willful murder so quickly. They said because of her statements. Because remember, she didn't have any defense. She was like, hey, I did it. I'm going to hang. I know it. You know,
Right.
on the stand, she didn't try to give a sob story or give any excuses or any defenses. She just said, and they're like, well, she didn't really leave us any room. Her attorneys tried, but there wasn't a whole lot for them to do once she confessed, and she just kept saying it was just, I knew what I was doing.
One last question from our listeners. Do you think Ruth knew deep down that killing David was the only way to end their destructive cycle, even if it meant ending her own life too?
That's a kind of a good theory about it, but I don't think so. Honestly, if that whole weekend had been taken in a certain context of her mental state, that would be a perfect example of diminished responsibility because she was unraveling so quickly over that weekend. Also, she was drunk the whole time pretty much. Even what she was drinking, they said was pretty strong. She was being totally ghosted by David Blakely, who had told her on Thursday that I'll be back later on and we're going to do this. And this was after he had just done the love bombing thing. He had just done that and talking about marriage again and this and that. And we're going to take Andre here and blah, 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 blah. So she was all excited about it. And then, she started, when he didn't show up and wouldn't call her back and, all of this kind of stuff, she started drinking, she started pacing, she started unraveling. And then when she started stalking him and saw that he was at the Finlitters and they're having a party and he's there and she sees him leaving the house with his
Penny.
friend and also another woman, and he's just having a good time, and she felt humiliated. He's laughing at me behind my back with his fancy friends. And meanwhile, she's probably thinking about all the things that she has sacrificed for him, and because she loved him. And he has turned me into this laughing stock. And he's basically just, humiliating me to my face. Won't talk to me, won't, give me that even the respect to say, I'm not going to see you anymore. Anything. He's running, he's hiding from me. Anybody who wasn't unraveling would say, you know what, screw you, dude, and you'd be gone, right? But she was so fixated on getting him to talk to her, getting to hear what he had to say, and basically, I think she wanted just to have her say with him, and he wouldn't give her, the privilege of that. And I think she just unraveled. And then the whole thing about having a gun, that was convenient. No questions about that. But, if she hadn't had the gun, it would have been different. But yeah, I don't know that it was conscious enough for her to think about, well, this is the only way I can end it. She knew it was going to happen to her. She said something when she was interviewed. She said, I just had this queer feeling all of a sudden that he needed to die. I needed to kill him. And it was like maybe because she felt an ego death from everything she'd gone through. And so the only way to, balance the scales was to actually take his life too. She was done in her mind. It was like, she's kind of done. This is what you did to me. Kind of
Right.
thing.
Right. Right. I mean, I don't know. This is all just my thoughts and opinions now. Maybe she was just like over the chase. Like she was like, okay, like once David's gone, I'm not trying to chase another toxic man. I'm over this. And maybe she also was like, I also don't want to live this boring lifestyle with Desmond either. So, like she said early on, a short life and a gay one. she had a gay life. She had a fabulous life up until David Blakely, before this, tumultuous love triangle. She had a great, I mean, her childhood wasn't great, but she in her 20s,
Yeah.
she had a great life for herself. And, maybe she just was done, was like, there's nothing left for me after this. Like,
Right. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how conscious it was, but I think she just, you're right. I think she just kind of gave up. Just like,
yeah.
we're done here.
How long did it take to research and record the Ruth Ellis series?
It was funny because I only learned about this case when I was in CrimeCon London, and that was what month was that? It was this year,
June, or was it May?
and then I started the series in July.
Right.
So, so yeah. So as far as jumping on the research, that was pretty quick. And we recorded it over the like 5 or 6 weeks, I think, something like
Yeah.
that. When I thought about this idea about doing a long form series, I thought, oh, that'll be good. I want to try that, and I think people will like it. But then when I started to just get into, outlining the episodes, I thought, oh my God, am I gonna be able to do 7 episodes? Like, I don't know if I can do it. Like, how am I gonna do that? Oh my God, what did I do? And so, but then as I started going, especially as I got to the part about her and David Blakely and, the things leading up to it, I was like, there was a lot more. I could have done probably 10 episodes.
Wow.
There was just a lot more. And but it came together pretty quickly. I tend to do that. Like once I do the research and I start doing an outline of the things that I think are important, then I can put the actual narration together pretty quickly.
We kind of touched on this question. Why do you think the jury was able to find Ruth guilty of willful murder so quickly, even though they knew it would lead to her execution?
Yeah, I think that, because of her statements, but as far as the execution part, I think they did have a problem with it because she was a woman, but I think they had less of a problem with it because she was a certain kind of woman. If she had been a
Of course.
housewife or, somebody with money or whatever, I think it would have been more difficult. But although they didn't have a whole lot of leeway in hers, but I think
Right.
that they were able to absolve themselves of as much guilt, even though some of them did say, that was difficult and it really, it did bother them to do it, especially since she was a mother and that kind of thing. Probably the women more than the men, but I think it was a little bit easier because of that fact that they looked at her lifestyle and they judged her that way. So
Right. Well, even within those 3 weeks, there was outcry on both sides or
mhm.
from
Yeah.
the public. Some were like, this woman absolutely deserves to be hanged. The woman who the bullet like ricocheted and hit her, uh,
Mhm.
she was like, I was there, it was traumatic. And she even like went on and did interviews. And I'm sure it was very traumatic to even witness that. Like I've never seen a shooting, so I can't imagine what she felt. But like she was like very team hang. But there was also other people, women and men, that were like, no, she's a mother. She's, a young woman who doesn't deserve to be executed this way. But I feel like you said, if it would have been a housewife, would the public outcry have been different?
Yeah, I mean, there's still debate about that, but most people today would said that yeah, she was a perfect candidate for diminished responsibility, and she shouldn't have gotten that sentence, especially as quickly as it was. So, um, there should have been more investigation done and this is another question that came up about Desmond Cusson, because we do know that there was some indication that he was the one that gave her the gun. And should he have been investigated more thoroughly as an accomplice? Like, did he encourage her? Because think about it, he was in love with Ruth and wanted David out of the way. What evidence is there that he was involved? They ask, and so Robert Hammond, he did the author was able to get an interview with Desmond Cusson. He actually met with him, and
Right.
this was, I believe, the year after or maybe within a year of the execution. And this is what he said. He asked, only one major question remains unanswered. Why did Desmond Cusson agree to give her the gun? One reason could have been that he was so jealous of David Blakely that he saw David's death as the only solution. And then the author says, I do not believe this. In the 3 months between Ruth Ellis's arrest and execution, I spent hours with Cusson getting much of the background information about his relationship with Ruth, which John Bickford, that was her first solicitor, used to prepare his defense. He said, I did not find Desmond Cusson a likable man, but what did emerge was a very cool and determined operator. It was also clear that he was besotted with Ruth, despite, and then again, he's got to put his little thing in there, despite the fact that she always treated him like a poodle.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Anyway, he says in 1962, so this was a few years later, he had talked to him before. And then in 1962, when he decided to write the Ruth Ellis story, he phoned Desmond and he said, he told him, I'm going to write a book about it. And he said, I'm pretty sure you gave her the gun. What do you want to say about it? Said he was completely unfazed by the question. He said this, you know as well as I do that I told Inspector Davies I knew nothing about a gun, and that's that. But he said we had a few more drinks and then dropped the subject. Then, as we were about to leave the pub, Desmond said this, if I were writing your book, I'd say the man who gave her the gun never thought she'd use it. You see, he must have known that if she shot Blakely, she would either be hanged or go to prison for a long while. So I think you should, this is Desmond talking in hypotheticals. He said, so I think you should say that Ruth told him that she knew someone who would shoot David for her, but she needed him to get the gun for him. So basically, he's saying, well, this is what he wanted him to believe. Ruth was going to have David killed, but she didn't have a gun to give the hitman. She asked Desmond for it. He said, but she had to get the gun for him. He added, and if you say this is what I told you, I'll call you a liar and ask my lawyer to deal with you. So come on. I mean, so there's another question, right? Like, so he's basically saying, Ruth, I didn't know Ruth was going to shoot David. She just asked me to get a gun for her. And because I was so in love with her, I just did what she wanted, like I always did.
Right.
But I had no idea this was going to happen. I would have never done it. I would have said, no, she'll be hanged. Why would I want the woman I love to be imprisoned or hanged? So interesting, right?
Very interesting.
You had to
But
have
she remained
some,
so calm after
yeah.
shooting and murdering David Blakely. Why do you think she did remain so calm? And did that seal her fate?
Yeah, I think it did seal her fate because she looked like she was just this cool, calm murderess, right? But
Right.
honestly, what if I had to guess again? And I do have to guess. If I had to guess, I think that she dissociated. Like when it
Yeah.
happened, she wasn't. It's almost like she was out of her body. Not to say she didn't know what she was doing. She knew what she was doing, but she was in such a weird mental state. The emotion when you're dissociated like that, even though you're there, you're not like whatever. You know what you're doing, but your emotions are detached. Like you have no emotion about it. You're just numb emotionally.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, she wasn't going to cry, or she just said, it was because she talked about looking down at the body and seeing, wow, that's a lot of blood. Like just very like not connected to it emotionally at all. Say, any psychiatrist getting on the stand today could make a strong case for dissociation. Like,
Mhm.
and that has to go, of course, it's coupled with the trauma and the stress she was under, and remember she
Right.
had also just had a miscarriage or right before that. I mean, she had
Mhm.
been sick. There's a lot of things they could have brought in to say that she just wasn't in her right mind in that moment. Not to say that she's insane, she's responsible, but she's not responsible to the point of she should be hanged, you know.
Right.
She's probably going to spend a lot of time in prison because she took a life, but she obviously was not in her complete, intact mental faculties when she did it.
Yeah, we know she immediately gave herself to the police and refused to cooperate with her defense, believing that she deserved to be hanged. Like she was like,
Mm-hmm.
nope, she accepted her fate. However, she wanted her day in court to prove to the public that, in her opinion, David's friends, Aunt and Carol Finlater, were partially to blame for his death. Why did she believe this?
She pinpointed them because he spent the most time with them. I mean, it really could have been anybody in his social circle that where she didn't feel fit in or she felt like we're against her. Plus, remember, she had personal experience being around Aunt and Carol at the races and things like that. They were never warm to her. They were never. They would tell David things like, "What are you doing hanging around with this club hostess?" Right? And of course, they didn't understand his obsession with her. Partially, I think it was true. Partially, I don't know. It may or may not have been true that they didn't like her. They wanted to get David away from her. And I think partially that's true. And then she said, "Oh, she's there with the nanny." That could have been true because we saw some things. Some people had said, "Yeah, what's weird? Why is he driving around with the nanny at night or whatever?"
Yeah.
I don't think they cared who it was as long as he was away from Ruth. Maybe they were snobs, or maybe they were trying to be a good friend because they could see how toxic the relationship was too. But you can't say that to them because they get mad at you, right?
Oh, yeah.
When you call out their
God
toxic
forbid you want the
relationship.
best. Yeah, for them. Well, no, while I was listening to the audio, because Ruth was really adamant about having her day in court to, you know, call out the Finlitters. It was like a cliffhanger, like who, gave her the gun. And I was like, oh, could it have been Carol? Because we know that David had an affair with Carol, or Carol had an affair with David. And yet Aunt still was friends with David. So I was like,
I
oh
know.
my God, was like Aunt and Carol kind of wanting David out of the picture because maybe there was still like some like love triangle-ish stuff going on there. So I was like, oh my God, this is like so much cheeseman. And then I wasn't even thinking Desmond would have given her the gun,
I
honestly.
know. I know, right?
That's why else would she have been so adamant? And then once, Desmond came into well, he was always in the photo, but like once, that all of that came out, I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, like she was really adamant about like wanting to bring Anne and Carol Finletter's names down with
Oh
her.
yeah.
And unfortunately, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. Yeah, they were able to. They were on the stand very briefly. When Ant was on the stand, it was annoying because he was so haughty. He was like, why am I even here answering these stupid questions, kind of thing. That was
Oh,
his whole attitude. And she was just, I mean, she was devastated. She thought, get him. She was telling her lawyers, just get him. Like show people what they're really like and what they did and how they set him up. For us to have this, terrible thing blew up in whatever, and they didn't do any of that. They just kind of treated them with kid gloves. They just were, a couple and let him wiggle out of anything. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
wow. There was not so many questions people had, but just comments that like people left on like some of the reels and stuff on TikTok. Whoa, Ruth didn't mess around. She shouldn't have done this. Dane, they were pretty fast to put her to death. A lot of comments like that. Like,
That's one of the reasons why I was so drawn to this case, because when I found that part out, I'm like, wow,
yeah,
now I really need to know what happened here.
this was one. So now death row inmates have to wait 50 years to get executed. Why do you think that is?
Because now we've seen exonerations happen. We've seen new, evidence coming to light. I don't think, I mean, and there's the good thing about it is we don't want to take that kind of a act lightly, that you put somebody to
Right,
death. That's
right.
that's major. That's final. And what if you got it wrong? Even like this is obviously if there was witnesses, but people now think it was wrong to execute her because of the circumstances that weren't given any consideration at that time.
Hmm.
So we have to live with the decisions we make, as a justice system. And I think that's one of the ones people are very, very squeamish about. There's a lot of debate about it. Even if people believe in the death penalty, they want it used very sparingly and very carefully. So 3 weeks is not enough time. It's
No,
just not.
definitely not. Yeah, that's it for questions.
Yeah. Oh,
The o-
can I tell you the
oh
ghost
yeah.
story
Yes, yes,
before
yes,
we wrap
yes. Go
up?
ahead.
Okay. I've been, writing and recording true crime stories for 10 years now. And people ask, do you ever have nightmares? Do you ever think, oh gosh, this stays with you? I go, yeah, some things stay with me, but I don't have nightmares. I don't have the oogie boogies about anything. I'm just not that way. I've been doing this too long, and I have a different kind of sensibility about things, personality maybe, that things don't really bother me that way. So no nightmares, no none of that. So I have had a couple instances when I had a weird feeling, and one we know is the Fox Hollow Farm one when I was doing years and years ago, and I think the other one was maybe the La Laurie Mansion one, and it wasn't that I spooked myself because I'm not like that, So
Yeah.
anyway, this time, I'm doing Ruth's story, and I remember it was the night I was recording, and I try to do it at night because it's quieter. The night I was recording the execution episode, when I get to things like that, the very heavy stuff, like, the details and her going to the gallows and all that kind of stuff, it does kind of, when I'm narrating it, not so much when I'm writing it, but when I'm narrating it, it kind of, if you'll notice, it slows me down. Like my speech is slower. I have pauses between things only because I don't know, it just feels very heavy, very, very weighty, and I want to get it right. I kept have this feeling that it was just like a split second, like something moved behind me. Now I have my dog. I have Benji. Right now he's in his little crate right here at the on the floor. So it could be him moving or whatever, but it was higher up, and so it happened once, and then a couple minutes later it happened again, and then it happened a third time. And while it happened, I think probably by the second time I realized it's nothing in here. Like I'm seeing something that's not in here, and I stopped myself and I thought, I'm not spooking myself. I feel fine. Like it's not
Yeah.
bothering, it's not scary, it's not making me jump. It's none of that. It's an awareness that some energy is moving behind me and trying to get my attention for some reason. So I'm like, okay, and that's all it was. And if I'd been here any other time doing whatever, like making the bed or something, and I felt that, I'd be like, what the hell? I'd do that. Right. This time it didn't feel like that. It just, like, I knew, I almost said it in my head, but I didn't want to say it in my head, like, okay, Ruth, you know, right. And I'm like, okay. So then I stopped, and I think I restarted that part of that about when she's going to the gallows. And I said, let me be even more deliberate about this, because for some reason, she wants me to get this right, you know? And so I did it again. I slowed it down a little bit, and I did it. And I felt that again a couple more times. And then when I was done, it was done. But then later on, when I was talking about her, her final days or whatever. And that came through again. I'll give you guys another thing that was weird. I haven't told Lorena this yet either. And it also give you a little bit of sneak peek of what's coming next. Because the next thing I started researching, and I was online looking for stuff about this case, happened again. I was reading about Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, because that's the next series.
Yes.
And I thought, these women, man, they want their stories told right. They're watching over and making sure. And I'm like, I dig it. I love that.
Yes.
That's what I want to do. I want to make sure that I'm as much as I can tell their stories in a way that they would approve of. Because now Ruth was, she was the perpetrator, but I believe she was also a victim. Black
Absolutely.
Dahlia, of course, Elizabeth Short was, as I just said that, I just got all these chills. So yeah, I know I'm saying the right thing. That's what I know I'm saying the right thing. Is like she was a victim. And the thing is, but she wasn't just a victim. And that's the thing that I think is so important to her and, her family, if they were still alive or whatever, is that she was more than that sensational victim that we've heard about all of these
Right.
years, 70 years. So I wanted to make sure that I tell her story and do as much as I can to know who she is, and maybe get some ideas about then how she ended up this way,
Right.
how this happened. Might not, or might just have theories, just like we did with some of the stuff we just talked about. But I think it's important to at least try. And
Right.
so I really believe that there's many people who have written about her, talked about her, done things about her. And I think that they've tried to, do some good work and respect her memory and all of that. But I don't know. I just feel like I always know when I'm supposed to do something because I really feel drawn to it. And I never thought I would do this one because I'm thinking it's been told to death, right?
Hmm.
But it just came to me, just like Ruth Ellis. It came to me one day, and I thought, I got to do that one. I don't know why, I got to do it. And then, like I told you, the next day I got a email from somebody
Yeah.
who had
Did
just,
that
it's
book.
not even released yet, a book, a very deep dive into her life and her last, 3 months of her life, like step by step, minute by minute. That's what I'm looking for. I want to know, I want to be in her shoes and see if I can figure out anything else about her that we don't know, and maybe why this happened or how it happened. So that's something I'm really jazzed about. I think that's going to be really cool.
I am super excited for this new series. I honestly, the Black Dahlia case is one that I am not very familiar with. Like I know what happened, like we all know what happened, but I've never done like a deep dive like this. Some people have their cases that like, they're just obsessed with. They go down rabbit holes, they like know all about it. This is not one that I have ever done that with, and being as old as it is, you think I would have by now, but no, so I'm super excited. I don't get to do any of the research with, which I'm totally fine, but I love like getting the audio and like it's like I'm the first one to listen to it, so it's like wahaha, I get first dibs on it.
Well,
And
Lorena also gets to look for all the photos and stuff, which is really
yes,
cool. Because sometimes,
yes,
like, I'm watching the videos, I'm like, oh, I've never seen that photo. That's cool. Like, where'd she
yeah,
find that one?
I'm
Yeah.
excited to like, see her develop throughout her life and everything. But yeah, I'm super excited to get all the tea and all the details on this case because yeah, there are so many theories out there, and excited to see how you write
Yeah.
it.
It'll be at least a 6-part series. All right. Well, thanks everybody once again. And yeah, this was fun. Thanks for your questions. That was amazing. Those were some really great questions, things we hadn't really thought about or looked into, but made us put our thinking caps on and go back into the series and grab some of those details and like kind of revisit those. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. And that wraps up our first ever long form true crime series, Hanged, Ruth Ellis and the Price of Passion. Thank you to all of our listeners who sent in comments and questions for this episode. We appreciate you engaging with us and adding to the show. I hope you've enjoyed taking this journey with us, exploring one of the UK's most haunting and controversial cases and the complex woman at its center. But don't worry, your next true crime obsession is just around the corner. This October, we'll delve into another gripping story, a sensational case from the US that captured headlines and continues to spark debate to this day. Stay tuned for the big reveal. Our next series trailer will drop on October 6th, and the first episode will premiere on October 13th. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And if you're a Patreon member, you already have a head start, with early access, ad-free listening, and exclusive sneak peeks of what's coming next. If you'd like to join our community of true crime fans and get all those extras, visit patreon.com/onceuponacrime to learn more. Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer and co-host for this episode is Lorena Garcia. Until next time, be good to one another.